All right. Our second week of Samson. Revenge, retaliation, and striking out, these are often the responses that first cross our minds when someone does wrong against us, right? But since the coming of Jesus Christ, Scripture is clear and straightforward. We are not to seek personal revenge or retaliation. Now, this does not mean that we do not defend ourselves against evil, assault, attack, or war. We are never to indulge and give license to evil. On the contrary, we are to stand up against evil and stand strongly for righteousness and faith. We must never allow an evil act, the damaging or taking of a single life, not if it's in our power to stop such a wrongful behavior. See, justice, the building of a legal, just society, is demanded by God. But personal revenge and retaliation, those are forbidden. A vengeful, vindictive spirit must never be allowed to grip our hearts, for we are not to allow hatred, wrath, or malice to devour us. When someone does something wrong against us, legal, justified responses are allowed by God. But He never allows us to become so vindictive that we become consumed with getting even. And the message today is a clear picture of seeking personal, private revenge. Now, as we know throughout his life, Samson seemed to be driven by a passion for revenge against the Philistines. As we learned last week, the Philistines had invaded and conquered Israel. The Israelites were now subjected and ruled over by the Philistines. I mean, no doubt they had been disarmed and not allowed to possess any sort of weapon whatsoever. They were now controlled and governed entirely by the Philistines. As with any conquest and oppression, life under the Philistines was cruel, harsh, hard, and it was confining. Life was uncertain, filled with the possibility of imminent danger, threats, and death. I mean, only a very shallow peace existed between any Israelite citizen and the ruling oppressors. And this is clearly seen in the next point of disturbance caused by our man Samson. So starting with chapter 15 of Judges, verses 1 through 8. Later on, it was during the wheat harvest, Samson visited his bride, bringing a young goat. He said, "Let me see my wife, show me her bedroom." But her father wouldn't let him in. He said, "I concluded that by now you hated her with a passion, so I gave her to your best man. But her little sister is even more beautiful. Why not take her instead?" Samson said, "That does it. This time when I wreak havoc on the Philistines, I'm blameless." Samson went out and caught 300 jackals. Now, a jackal is a fox. He lashed the jackal's tails together in pairs and tied a torch between each pair of tails. He then set fire to those torches and let them loose in the Philistine fields of ripe grain. Everything burned. Both stacked and standing grain, vineyards and olive orchards, everything. The Philistines said, "Who did this?" They were told, "Samson, son-in-law of the Timnit, who took his bride and gave her to his best man." Well, the Philistines went up and burned both her and her father to death. Samson then said, "If this is the way that you're going to act, I swear I'll get even with you. And I'm not quitting till the job's done." With that, he tore into them, ripping them limb from limb, a huge slaughter. Then he went down and stayed in a cave at Etam Rock. Okay, Samson sought revenge for the loss of his wife. Now, last week we learned that Samson had never consummated his marriage because his wife had betrayed him to the Philistines. Being gripped by a violent anger, he had stormed out of the wedding and away from his newlywed wife, returning to temporarily live with his parents. After some time, his anger cooled off, and a desire to be reunited with his wife filled his heart. See, in his mind, it was now time to consummate the marriage. So Samson took a young goat as a gift and went to visit his bride. But when he arrived, he was greeted with the shocking news. The shocking news was that his wife had been given to the best man of his wedding. The news of this predicament was explained by the father-in-law, which we read. And because Samson had stormed out of the wedding, the father-in-law had concluded that he would never return to his wife because of her betrayal. Now note the father-in-law's that he offered his younger daughter to Samson as a compromise. But again, Samson burned with anger and vowed revenge against the Philistines, and he claimed innocence in seeking revenge against them. Keep in mind here, folks, that two very serious wrongs have been committed against Samson. First, the 30 guests at his bachelor party had won a costly bet with Samson by cheating. They had secured the answer to a riddle from his wife by threatening her and her family's life. And secondly, Samson's wife had been given to the friend or best man of that wedding. These were very serious wrongs, cruel acts against Samson. Anger against the Philistines surged through his body, and revenge gripped his spirit. Samson was aroused to strike out against the Philistines, and the first act of revenge was the destruction of the harvest of the Philistines. As we read, Samson went out into the fields and forests and caught 300 foxes, tied their tails together in pairs, and then fastened torches to each pair of tails. He then ignited those torches and set the foxes loose in the fields. So all the grain, vineyard, and olive groves caught fire. I mean, they were destroyed. This was, no doubt, a very serious blow to the Philistines' economy. And as we are all aware, violence breeds violence. So a second act of revenge now takes place. But this time, the revenge was executed by the Philistines as a reaction against Samson. They retaliated by killing Samson's wife and her father, burning them alive. The reaction of Samson was another act of revenge. He vowed retaliation because of the Philistines' savage and brutal execution on his wife and her family. Samson was gripped by a raging spirit of revenge. He attacked the Philistines with great fury, killing many of them. Now again, this is a dude who tore a lion in half with his bare hands. I would not want to make this guy angry. After he killed a lot of them, he now knew that he was a fugitive. So Samson fled for his life, and he hid in a cave. Now for us, again, Scripture is clear and straightforward. We are not to seek revenge or retaliate against people. Jesus Christ himself told us this much in Matthew 5, 38 and 39. Here's another old saying that deserves a second look. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Is that going to get us anywhere? Here's what I propose. Don't hit back. If someone strikes you, stand there and take it. All right, so let's continue this chapter, Judges 15, this time 9 through 20. The Philistines set out and made camp in Judah, preparing to attack Lehi. When the men of Judah asked, "Why have you come up against us?" they said, "We're out to get Samson. We're going after Samson to do to him what he did to us." Now 3 companies of men, that's 3,000 people, 3,000 men from Judah, went down to the cave at Edom Rock and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines already bully and lord it over us? So what's going on with you making things even worse?" He said, "It was tit for tat. I only did to them what they did to me." They said, "Well, we've come down here to tie you up and turn you over to the Philistines." And Samson said, "Just promise not to hurt me." "We promise," they said. "We will tie you up and surrender you to them, but believe us, we won't kill you." They proceeded to tie him with new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came to meet him, shouting in triumph. And then the Spirit of God came upon him again with great power. The ropes on his arms fell apart like flax on fire. The thongs slipped off his hands. He spotted a fresh donkey jawbone, reached down and grabbed it, and with it he killed the whole company. And Samson said, With a donkey's jawbone, I made heaps of donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I killed an entire company. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone. He named that place Ramoth Lehi, meaning Jawbone Hill. Now, he was suddenly very thirsty. He called out to God, "You have given your servant this great victory. Are you going to abandon me to die of thirst and fall to the hands of the uncircumcised?" So God split open the rock basin in Lehi. Water gushed out and Samson drank. His spirit revived. He was alive again. And that's why it's called Collar Spring. It's still there at Lehi today. Samson judged Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Wow. Right? Let's break this one down. We see Samson sought revenge for Israel and for the Lord by slaying 1,000 Philistine soldiers. This, folks, is a clear picture of God's power to overcome all enemies, no matter what their strength. Samson was now a criminal and a fugitive in the eyes of the Philistines. They were now determined to hunt him down until they captured him. The Philistines assembled and sent a battalion of soldiers into Judah to arrest Samson. Well, the leaders of Judah promptly investigated the troop movement of the Philistines, for they were very concerned about the disturbance that was happening, as opposed to threat now to their lives. Hence, they negotiated a very quick solution to the problem. They agreed to arrest Samson themselves and turn him over to them. Now, as the story proceeds, note how this event provided a unique opportunity for the Israelites to rally around Samson and throw off the oppression of the Philistines. But sadly, they meekly submitted to the oppressors and offered to arrest and turn Samson over to them. They're willing to do this, knowing without a doubt that Samson would most likely be executed as a criminal. The leaders of Judah mobilized and sent an army of 3,000 men to track down Samson. When they found him, they interrogated him and charged him with being a troublemaker and threatening the peace. And note how Samson justified his vengeful behavior. He was merely doing to them what they had done to him. When the officer in charge swore that he would only arrest Samson, not kill him, Samson surrendered. And they tied him with 2 new ropes and led him to the Philistines. You know how tough new ropes are? That's why it's pointed out as new ropes in Scripture, to tell us how strong those ropes really were. Now, a stunning, remarkable victory over the Philistines took place. Samson demonstrated an astounding, paralyzing feat of strength. As he's being led toward the Philistine battalion, the Philistine soldiers begin to walk towards him, shouting out in a triumphant battle cry. Now, as with anyone experienced such a scene, energy surged through the body of Samson. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, empowering him with enormous supernatural strength. Samson snapped those ropes, binding his hands. And then he grabbed a fresh jawbone of a donkey and began swinging away at the enemy troops, fighting for his life. When the enemy troops ceased trying to capture him, 1,000 enemy soldiers lay dead at his feet. Being supernaturally empowered by God himself, Samson, the Lord's deliverer, had executed a just judicial judgment against the cruel, evil Philistines. We read that Samson, who seemed to have a gift for words, shouted out a short poem. And then he named the battlefield to commemorate the great victory God had given over the cruel, evil enemy of God's people. He named the battle site Ramoth Lehi, which we learn means Jawbone Hill. Then Samson was totally fatigued, I guess as one would be, after killing 1,000 men with a jawbone. He felt as though he were literally dying of thirst. And he did the only thing that he could. He cried out to the Lord for help. Now note these facts, all right? This is the first time that we read that Samson has acknowledged the Lord, giving credit for the great victory to the Lord. He He then prayed for help, for God to give him water to drink and to deliver him from being arrested by the unbelieving Philistines. The Lord heard the prayer of Samson, as God does. He hears our prayer. And he provided water and renewing strength for Samson. The place is now known as Collar Spring to this day, because it's where Samson called out to God. Lastly, we learned that Samson's tenure as judge lasted for 20 years. Now, think about this, if you will. All kinds of enemies confront every single one of us. Enemies that can damage or destroy us. Enemies such as disease, addiction, terrorists, thieves, kidnappers, vengeful people, abusers, murderers, the lawless, the violent, attackers, rapists, warmongers, evil dictators, the selfish, the greedy, and persecutors. I mean, the list of enemies can go on and on and on. But folks, there is deliverance. The power to walk through any threatening situation. God will empower us to conquer and overcome. Even if we must walk through the valley of the shadow of death, God will be with us. He will deliver us victoriously right into his presence, conquering death. Even if an enemy injures us, God will give us the power to live above that injury. He will help us conquer any discouragement and any physical disability. God promises to be with us and to carry us through any trial, no matter how severe or devastating it may be. A victorious conquest is ours through the power of God. And it's true. Because everything I say is backed by Scripture. Let's turn to Scripture. Because Scripture tells us as such. Starting with Hebrews 13, verse 6 on the screen above me, you'll see. We can boldly quote, God is there ready to help. I'm fearless no matter what. Who or what can get to me? Also 1 John 5, 4 and 5. Every God-begotten person conquers the world's ways. The conquering power that brings the world to its knees is our faith. The person who wins out over the world's ways is simply the one who believes Jesus is the Son of God. 2 Corinthians 32, verse 8. We have our God to help us and fight for us. Lastly, Psalm 28, verse 7. One of my personal favorites. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and I am helped. Brothers and sisters, as you can plainly see through God's holy word, through Christ, we can conquer any enemy who seeks to injure or kill us. And for that, I say praise be to God.